The bullet grazed so close to Maeve Dalton's temple that she felt the heat of it sear past her skin. And in that moment, crouched behind a water barrel in the dirt street of Provo, Utah, she understood with absolute clarity that her 22 years of life had been leading toward this inevitable conclusion. The year was 1878, and Prover City, as some still called it, had grown from a Mormon settlement into a bustling frontier town where the railroad brought not just prosperity, but also trouble. Maeve had arrived 3 months ago on that very railroad, fleeing from nothing and toward nothing, which seemed to be the story of her entire existence. She had worked every day since she was old enough to hold a broom, first in the textile mills of Massachusetts, then as a servant in a dozen different households across the expanding nation, always moving, always alone, always aware that she possessed nothing and meant nothing to anyone. The shooting had erupted outside the Silver Creek Saloon when 2 drifters got into a dispute over cards, and Maeve had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong moment, carrying laundry from the boarding house, where she worked 16 hours a day for a woman named Mrs. Kimball, who spoke to her only to criticize. Now the laundered sheets lay scattered in the dust, trampled by boots and stained with the red dirt that covered everything in this high desert valley. Another shot rang out, and Maeve pressed herself lower, her heart hammering against her ribs. She heard shouting, the thunder of horses, and then a voice close to her ear saying, "Stay down, miss. Keep your head low and don't move until I tell you." She turned her head slightly and saw a man crouched beside her, his body angled to shield hers. He wore dusty brown chaps over denim trousers, a blue cotton shirt faded from many washings, and a hat that had seen better days. His face was sun-weathered, with strong features and eyes the color of the sky just before twilight. He held a revolver in his hand, but he wasn't firing it, just watching the chaos with an intensity that suggested he was calculating every movement, every possibility. "Who are you?" Maeve whispered, though she couldn't say why she was whispering when guns were still discharging all around them. "Nathan Cross," he said, not looking at her. "I work at the Double Bar Ranch east of town. Just came in for supplies." He paused, then added, "You picked a hell of a time to do laundry." Despite everything, despite the fear and the absurdity, Maeve felt something almost like a laugh catch in her throat. "I don't pick my times. Mrs. Kimball picks them for me." The shooting stopped as suddenly as it had started. One of the drifters lay dead in the street, and the other was being dragged away by the town marshal, bleeding from his shoulder. Nathan stayed where he was for a long moment, scanning the area, before he finally holstered his gun and stood up, offering Maeve his hand. She looked at that hand, calloused and strong, extended toward her, and something twisted in her chest. Nobody offered her help. Nobody offered her anything. She was the invisible girl who scrubbed floors and hauled water and existed in the margins of other people's lives. But here was this stranger, this cowboy with kind eyes holding out his hand like she mattered. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet with an easy strength. "You hurt?" he asked, his eyes doing a quick assessment of her person that was thorough but not invasive. "No," Maeve said. "I'm fine." "Thank you for staying with me." "Couldn't very well leave you there," Nathan said. He looked down at the scattered laundry, then at Maeve's face. "You work at Kimball's boarding house?" "Yes." Maeve bent to gather the soiled sheets, her cheeks burning with frustration. "Mrs. Kimball would make her wash them all again, would dock her pay for the delay, would find a way to make this her fault. Everything was always her fault." Nathan crouched down and started helping her, gathering the linens with care despite their condition. "My mother ran a boarding house in Kansas," he said conversationally. "Worked herself near to death doing it. I remember how hard it was." Maeve stared at him, A white sheet draped over his arm, this cowboy who had no reason to help her and every reason to simply walk away. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," Nathan replied, "but I'm going to anyway." He smiled at her then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face into something warm and open. "Come on, let's get these gathered up before they blow away." They worked together in silence, collecting the laundry piece by piece. When they finished, Nathan carried the heavy basket for her back to the boarding house, refusing her protests. Mrs. Kimball stood on the porch, a severe woman in her 50s with a mouth that seemed permanently turned down at the corners. "What took you so long?" she demanded, not acknowledging Nathan at all. "Those need to be washed again, every single one, and it's coming out of your wages." "There was shooting in the street," Maeve said quietly. "I had to take cover." "Excuses," Mrs. Kimball snapped. "Always excuses with you." She turned and went inside, letting the door slam behind her. Nathan set the basket down on the porch, and when he looked at Maeve, there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Anger, maybe, on her behalf. "She always that pleasant?" he asked. "She's better than some I've worked for," Maeve said, which was true but not comforting. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, suddenly aware of how she must look, dust-covered and disheveled, her plain gray dress stained and worn. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Cross. I should get back to work." "Nathan," he said. "Just Nathan." He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else, then seemed to think better of it. "You take care of yourself, miss." "Dalton," Maeve supplied. "Maeve Dalton." "Maeve," he repeated, and the way he said her name, soft and careful, made her feel like a real person instead of just a pair of hands that did work. "I'll see you around town." She watched him walk away, his long stride easy and unhurried, and she felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Not quite hope, because she had learned long ago that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt dangerous and foolish and entirely unwelcome. The next morning, Maeve was up before dawn as always, starting the fires in the boarding house kitchen, preparing breakfast for the 12 men who rented rooms from Mrs. Kimball. Most of them worked on the railroad or in the nearby mines, and they ate like they were starving, shoveling down eggs and biscuits and bacon without ever looking at her or acknowledging her presence. She was furniture to them, part of the house itself, and she had grown accustomed to the invisibility. She was outside drawing water from the well when she saw Nathan Cross walking up the dirt path toward the boarding house. Her first thought was that he must be looking for a room, though the double-bar ranch wasn't far enough to require staying in town. Her second thought, which she immediately dismissed as absurd, was that he was coming to see her. But he walked right up to where she stood at the well, and he was carrying something in his hand. Wildflowers, she realized. A handful of wildflowers in shades of purple and yellow and white, clearly picked from the fields outside of town. "Morning," Nathan said, and he held out the flowers toward her. "Saw these on my ride in and thought they were pretty, thought you might like them." Maeve stood frozen, the well rope still in her hands. She stared at the flowers, then at Nathan, then back at the flowers. Her mind felt blank, wiped clean of coherent thought. "I don't understand," she finally said, Nathan's brow furrowed slightly. "They're flowers," he said, like maybe she didn't know what flowers were. "For you." "Why?" The word came out sharper than she intended. "Because I wanted to give them to you," Nathan said simply. He was still holding them out, patient, waiting. Maeve's heart was beating too fast. She felt dizzy, unmoored. "I don't want your charity," she said, and she hated how her voice shook. Something shifted in Nathan's expression, an understanding that seemed to go deeper than the moment warranted. "It's not charity," he said quietly. "It's just flowers from one person to another. No strings, no expectations, just, I thought they'd make you smile. She had never received a gift in her life. Not once. Not at Christmas or birthdays, not that she had celebrated either of those things since she was a small child. She had received wages, meager and often withheld, and she had received criticism and orders and occasionally a slap across the face when she had been younger and worked for crueler people. But a gift, something freely given with no obligation attached, something offered simply because someone had thought of her. Never. Her hands shook as she reached out and took the flowers from him. They were soft and delicate, and they smelled like sunshine in the wild places beyond town. "Thank you," she whispered, and her eyes were burning with tears she absolutely would not let fall. Nathan smiled, that same genuine smile from the day before. "You're welcome, Maeve. I hope you have a good day." He tipped his hat to her and turned to go, and Maeve stood there holding the flowers like they were made of glass, like they might shatter if she gripped them too hard. She watched him walk away again, and this time the feeling in her chest wasn't adjacent to hope. It was hope itself, pure and terrifying. Mrs. Kimball found her standing there 10 minutes later, still clutching the flowers, the water bucket forgotten at her feet. "What are those?" the older woman demanded. "Flowers," Maeve said. "I can see they're flowers. What are they doing in your hands?" "You have work to do, girl. Get inside this instant and stop wasting time." Maeve went inside, but she kept the flowers. She put them in a chipped cup in the tiny room she occupied off the kitchen, a space barely large enough for her narrow cot and a single shelf where she kept her few possessions. The flowers looked impossibly bright in that dim space, like a small piece of heaven had fallen into hell. The next morning, Nathan was there again at the well, and he had more wildflowers in his hand. Different ones this time, in shades of pink and red. "Good morning," he said, like this was the most natural thing in the world, like he always brought flowers to servant girls before dawn. "You came back," Maeve said stupidly. "Said I'd see you around town," Nathan replied. He held out the flowers. These were growing near the creek. Reminded me of sunrise. Maeve took them with trembling fingers. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Nathan considered the question seriously. "Honestly, because yesterday when I gave you those flowers, you looked at them like they were the most precious thing in the world. And I realized that maybe nobody's ever given you anything before." He paused, his blue eyes searching her face. "Was I right?" Maeve couldn't speak. She just nodded. Something passed across Nathan's features, an emotion too complex to name. "Then I'll be here tomorrow morning too," he said. "And the morning after that, for as long as you're here to receive them." "You don't have to do that," Maeve managed to say. "I know," Nathan said. "But I want to." He smiled at her again, and then he was walking away, back toward where his horse was tied near the general store. Maeve stood at the well holding 2 bouquets of wildflowers, and she felt like her entire understanding of the world had shifted on its axis. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. People like Nathan Cross didn't notice people like Maeve Dalton, didn't think about them, didn't bring them flowers every morning before the sun had fully risen. But the flowers were real. She could feel their soft petals, smell their sweet fragrance. They were real, which meant Nathan was real, which meant that maybe, impossibly, she mattered to someone. The pattern continued day after day. Every single morning, Nathan appeared at the well with wildflowers in his hand. Sometimes they were simple prairie flowers, black-eyed Susans and purple coneflowers. Other times they were more delicate specimens, columbines and wild roses that he must have searched for in the higher elevations. He never stayed long, never asked anything of her, just offered the flowers with a few kind words and that smile that made her heart race. Maeve's tiny room began to fill with flowers. She had them in cups and jars and even an old boot she had found behind the boarding house. They were everywhere, bringing color and life to her gray existence, and every time she looked at them she felt that dangerous hope growing stronger in her chest. Mrs. Kimball noticed, of course. "That cowboy is still bringing you flowers," she said one morning, her tone disapproving. "It's not proper. What does he want from you?" "Nothing," Maeve said. "He's just being kind." "Men are never just kind," Mrs. Kimball said sharply. "Mark my words, girl. He wants something, and when he's done with you, you'll be ruined and I'll have to throw you out on the street." "Then where will you be?" The words stung because they echoed Maeve's own fears. She didn't understand Nathan's motivations. She didn't understand why someone like him, who seemed decent and good and steady, would waste his time on someone like her. But she couldn't bring herself to tell him to stop, because those flowers and those few minutes every morning had become the only bright spots in her existence. 3 weeks into this new routine, Nathan did something different. Instead of just handing her the flowers and leaving, he said, "Maeve, would you walk with me? Just for a little while. I know you're busy, but maybe you could spare half an hour." Maeve glanced back at the boarding house. It was Sunday and Mrs. Kimball had gone to church, something she did religiously even though she didn't seem to possess an ounce of Christian charity. "I suppose I could," Maeve said carefully. "Where would we walk?" "Just around town," Nathan said. "Maybe down by the river. It's a nice morning." They walked together through the quiet streets of Provo, past buildings made of adobe and wood, past gardens where fruit trees were beginning to blossom. Nathan walked slowly, matching his pace to hers, and he told her about his work at the Double Bar Ranch, about the horses he trained and the cattle drives that would start soon as spring fully arrived. "How did you end up in Utah?" Maeve asked, genuinely curious. "Followed work," Nathan said. "My father died when I was 16, and my mother passed 2 years after that. I'd been cowboying since I was old enough to sit a horse, so I just kept moving, taking jobs where I could find them. Ended up at the Double Bar about 4 years ago and decided to stay. Boss is fair, pays on time, and the country here is beautiful." He glanced at her. "What about you? How did you end up at Kimball's?" Maeve's story was less pleasant. She told him about growing up in an orphanage in Massachusetts, about being sent to work in the textile mills at age 10, about the series of jobs and migrations that had eventually brought her west. "I thought maybe things would be different out here," she admitted. "That's what everyone says, right? Go west and start over. But it's the same everywhere. If you're nobody no matter where you go." Nathan stopped walking. They had reached the Provo River, which ran swift and clear with snowmelt from the mountains. "You're not nobody," he said, and there was an intensity in his voice that made Maeve look up at him. "You're Maeve Dalton. You're strong and you're kind and you're beautiful, and you deserve so much better than how that woman treats you." Maeve felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You don't know me," she said. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," Nathan said. "I know that you're up before dawn every day working yourself to exhaustion. I know that you never complain even though you have every right to. I know that the first time I gave you flowers, you looked at them like they were magic, and that told me everything I needed to know about how you've been treated your whole life." He took a step closer to her. "I'd like to know you better, Maeve, if you'd let me." She should say no. She should protect herself, should keep the walls up that had kept her safe all these years. But when she looked into Nathan's eyes, she saw only sincerity and warmth, and she was so tired of being alone. "I'd like that too," she whispered. Nathan's whole face lit up. "Then maybe next Sunday, if you can get away, we could have a proper picnic. I'll bring food and we could ride out to this place I know in the foothills. The wildflowers up there are incredible right now." "Mrs. Kimball wouldn't like it," Maeve said. Mrs. Kimball doesn't get to decide your whole life, Nathan replied. You're entitled to some time for yourself. Tell her you need Sunday afternoon off. Tell her it's for church or something. Maeve smiled despite herself. That would be lying. Then tell her the truth. Tell her you're going on a picnic with a cowboy who thinks you're wonderful. Nathan grinned at her. What's she going to do, fire you? There are other jobs in this town, Maeve. You don't have to stay there. The idea was radical and terrifying, but it was also intoxicating. All right, Maeve said. Next Sunday, I'll meet you. They walked back to the boarding house together, and when they arrived, Nathan handed her that morning's bouquet of wildflowers, pink primroses, delicate and lovely. I'll see you tomorrow morning, he said, and every morning after that. Maeve watched him ride away on his bay horse, and she clutched the flowers to her chest, feeling like her entire life was beginning to change. Mrs. Kimball was livid when Maeve asked for Sunday afternoon off. Absolutely not, she said. You work every day, that's your arrangement. I feed you and house you, and in return you work. I work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, Maeve said, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. Surely I'm entitled to a few hours for myself. You're entitled to nothing, Mrs. Kimball snapped. You're a charity case, girl. Without me, you'd be on the street. You should be grateful. I'm not a charity case. You pay me wages, though barely enough to buy thread for mending my own clothes. I've earned time off. Maeve's heart was pounding, but she stood her ground. I'm taking Sunday afternoon. You can dock my pay if you want, but I'm going. Mrs. Kimball's face turned an alarming shade of red. Then don't bother coming back, she spat. You walk out that door on Sunday and your employment here is terminated. You'll have to find somewhere else to sleep and work. The threat should have terrified Maeve. Instead, she felt something like relief flood through her. Fine, she said. Then I'll find somewhere else. She worked through the rest of the week with a strange lightness in her chest. Nathan came every morning with flowers, and each day she told him what had happened, and each day his expression grew more determined. You'll figure something out, he assured her. I'll help you. There are families in town who need help, good families who'll treat you fair. On Saturday evening, after the supper dishes were done and the boarders had retired to their rooms, Maeve packed her few belongings into the small canvas bag she had carried across half the country. She had 3 dresses, a spare set of undergarments, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, and the small collection of dried wildflowers she had saved from Nathan's gifts. It wasn't much to show for 22 years of life. She slept little that night, lying awake on her narrow cot, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling around her. When dawn came, she rose and dressed carefully in her best dress, which was still shabby but at least clean and mended. She left her room and walked out to the well for the last time. Nathan was already there, and when he saw her carrying her bag, his expression shifted from joy to concern. You're really doing this, he said. She fired me, Maeve said. Or I quit. I'm not entirely sure which. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. I don't suppose you know anyone who needs help with cooking or cleaning or laundry. Nathan set down the flowers he had been holding and took both of her hands in his. You can stay at the ranch, he said. We have a cook and a housekeeper, but they're both getting on in years and could use help. Boss's wife, Mrs. Crawford, is a good woman. She'll give you a job and a fair wage, and you'll have your own room in the main house. He squeezed her hands gently. I promise you, Maeve. It'll be better than here. Tears pricked at Maeve's eyes. Why are you doing this? She asked, not for the first time. Why do you care what happens to me? Nathan's blue eyes were steady on hers. Because from the moment I saw you crouched behind that water barrel, looking terrified but not broken, I knew you were someone special. Because every morning when I ride into town, The thought of seeing your face is what makes me smile. Because when I lie down at night, I think about you sleeping in that tiny room, and it makes me angry that you're not somewhere better." He paused, and his voice dropped to something softer, more vulnerable. "Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Maeve Dalton, and I want to know where this goes." Maeve couldn't breathe. Nobody had ever said such things to her. Nobody had ever looked at her the way Nathan was looking at her now, like she was precious and valued and worth falling in love with. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to be loved." "Then we'll figure it out together," Nathan said. He released one of her hands to pick up the flowers, and he handed them to her, wild lupine, purple and beautiful. "Come with me to the ranch, Maeve. Let me show you that not everyone in the world is like Mrs. Kimball. Let me prove that you deserve good things." Maeve looked at the flowers, then at Nathan, then back at the boarding house where she had spent 3 miserable months. The choice should have been difficult, but it wasn't. "All right," she said. "Let's go." They rode together on Nathan's horse, Maeve sitting in front of him with her bag tied to the saddle and the flowers clutched carefully in her hand. The morning sun was rising over the Wasatch Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and the valley spread out before them in shades of green and brown. Nathan's arms were around her, steady and warm, and Maeve felt safer than she had in her entire life. The Double Bar Ranch was about 8 miles east of Provo, nestled in a valley with good grazing land and a creek that ran year-round. The ranch house was large and well-built, painted white with a wide porch and real glass windows. There were several outbuildings, a barn, corrals, and bunkhouses for the ranch hands. Everything looked prosperous and well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and good management. Nathan helped Maeve down from the horse and led her up to the main house. A woman emerged onto the porch before they reached it, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 50 years old, with gray-streaked brown hair and a face that looked kind but shrewd. "Nathan," she said, her eyes taking in Maeve with interest. "This must be the girl you've been riding into town to see every morning. Don't look so surprised. Everyone on the ranch knows about it." Nathan had the grace to look embarrassed. "Mrs. Crawford, this is Maeve Dalton. She needs work, and I thought maybe you could use extra help in the house. She's a hard worker, knows cooking and cleaning and laundry." Mrs. Crawford studied Maeve for a long moment, and Maeve stood straight under that assessing gaze, trying not to fidget. Finally, the older woman smiled. "You have an honest face," she said, "and Nathan's a good judge of character. We can always use help, especially with spring roundup starting soon. We'll be feeding extra hands, and my old bones aren't what they used to be. Can you make decent biscuits?" "Yes, madam," Maeve said. "And bread and pies and stews, whatever you need." "Good." "Wages are $20 a month plus room and board. You'll share a room with Sally. She's our other helper. She's young like you, about 19, came from a Mormon family up north but didn't want the life they had planned for her. You'll like her." Mrs. Crawford gestured toward the house. "Come on in and I'll show you around. Nathan, you get back to work. You've been shirking your duties to court this girl for long enough." Nathan grinned, not looking remotely chastised. "Yes, madam." He caught Maeve's eye and winked at her before heading toward the barn, and Maeve felt warmth spread through her chest. Mrs. Crawford proved to be everything Nathan had promised. She was fair and kind, and she treated Maeve like a person rather than a servant. The room Maeve was to share with Sally was bright and clean, with 2 real beds and a window that looked out over the mountains. Sally herself was a cheerful blonde girl with freckles and an easy laugh, and she welcomed Maeve like a long-lost sister. "Finally, another girl my age," Sally said, helping Maeve unpack her meager belongings. Mrs. Crawford is wonderful, but she doesn't understand that I want to talk about things besides recipes and mending. Are you really being courted by Nathan Cross? That's so romantic. He's one of the good ones, you know. Some of the hands are rough and crude, but Nathan's always been a gentleman. Maeve felt her cheeks heat. I don't know if we're courting exactly. He brings me flowers. Every single morning for a month, Sally said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Everyone knows about it, Maeve. The other hands tease him mercilessly, but he doesn't care. He just smiles and rides into town before dawn like it's the most important thing he has to do. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. I think he's in love with you. He said he might be, Maeve admitted, and saying it out loud made it feel more real and more terrifying. But I don't understand why. I'm nothing special. Sally's expression turned serious. You need to stop thinking that way, she said firmly. You're worth just as much as anyone else, Maeve Dalton. Maybe you haven't been treated like it before, but that's changing now. Trust me, life at the double bar is different. Mrs. Crawford doesn't tolerate anyone being mistreated, and neither does Mr. Crawford. You're safe here. Over the following weeks, Maeve settled into life at the ranch and discovered that Sally was right. The work was still hard, but it was satisfying work in a place where she was valued. Mrs. Crawford taught her new recipes and trusted her with responsibilities. Sally became a true friend, the first Maeve had ever had. The ranch hands were respectful, and Mr. Crawford, when she met him, was a gruff but fair man who paid his workers on time and treated them well. And every single morning, Nathan still brought her wildflowers. Now, instead of meeting at a well in town, he would find her in the kitchen before breakfast, would present her with whatever blooms he had gathered on his early morning ride, would stay for a few minutes of conversation before work began. The flowers accumulated in Maeve's room, in the kitchen, in the dining room, until the whole ranch house seemed to be overflowing with wildflowers and the evidence of Nathan's affection. One evening in late May, after supper was done and the dishes were washed, Nathan asked Maeve to walk with him down to the creek. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, and the air was warm with the promise of summer approaching. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, following the path beside the creek where willows grew in abundance. Finally, Nathan said, "You seem happy here. Are you?" "Yes," Maeve said honestly. "Happier than I've ever been. Mrs. Crawford is wonderful, and Sally has become like a sister to me." "And the work?" She paused, trying to find the right words. "The work feels different when people appreciate it. When someone says thank you or tells me I did well, it changes everything." "You deserve to hear those things all along," Nathan said. "Every single person you ever worked for should have appreciated you." They reached a bend in the creek where a large cottonwood tree grew, its branches spreading wide to create a canopy of shade. Nathan stopped there and turned to face Maeve, taking both her hands in his. "I have something I need to tell you," he said, and there was a nervousness in his voice that Maeve had never heard before. "What is it?" she asked, her heart beginning to race. "I know we've only been courting for a couple of months," Nathan began. "And I know that by any conventional standard that's not very long. But Maeve, I've been sure about you from the first day I saw you. I've never felt this way about anyone, never wanted to spend every moment with someone the way I want to spend them with you." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I'm in love with you completely and entirely, and I need you to know that." Maeve felt tears spring to her eyes. "Nathan, She didn't have his eloquence, didn't have the words to express the overwhelming emotions flooding through her. "I love you too," she finally managed. "I don't know when it happened or how, but somewhere between the flowers and the kindness and the way you look at me like I matter, I fell in love with you." Nathan's face broke into the widest smile Maeve had ever seen, and then he was pulling her close, wrapping his arms around her and holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Maeve melted into the embrace, her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She had never been held like this, with such tenderness and care, and it felt like coming home to a place she hadn't known existed. When they finally pulled apart, Nathan cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Maeve kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into that single perfect moment. "I want to marry you," Nathan said when they finally broke apart. "I know it's fast, and I know you might need time, but I want you to know my intentions. I want you to be my wife, Maeve. I want to build a life with you." Maeve's breath caught. Marriage, a husband, a partner who loved her. It was everything she had never let herself dream about. "Yes," she said, the word coming out in a rush. "Yes, I'll marry you, Nathan Cross." Nathan laughed, pure joy in the sound, and he spun her around right there by the creek, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, deeper this time, and Maeve felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They were married 6 weeks later in late June, in a simple ceremony at the church in Provo. Mrs. Crawford and Sally helped Maeve make a dress from new fabric, cream-colored cotton with small flowers embroidered at the collar and cuffs. It was the most beautiful thing Maeve had ever owned, made more beautiful by the fact that her friends had helped create it specifically for her. The morning of her wedding, Maeve woke before dawn out of habit. She dressed carefully, her hands trembling with nerves and excitement. When she emerged from her room, Sally was waiting with a crown of wildflowers that Nathan had somehow managed to leave on the porch before riding back to prepare himself. "He couldn't resist," Sally said with a grin, settling the flower crown on Maeve's head. "Even on your wedding day, he has to bring you flowers." Maeve touched the delicate petals, tears pricking her eyes. "He's brought me flowers every single morning since the day we met," she said softly. "Every single morning without fail." "That's love," Mrs. Crawford said, coming to join them. She looked emotional herself, her eyes shining. "That's a man who knows how to cherish the person he loves. You've chosen well, Maeve." The wedding was small but perfect. Mr. and Mrs. Crawford were there, along with Sally and several of the ranch hands who had become friends to Maeve. A few townsfolk attended, including the shopkeeper who had always been kind to her, and surprisingly, the marshal who had arrested the drifter that fateful day when Maeve and Nathan first met. Nathan stood at the front of the church wearing his best suit, his hair combed back and his face shining with happiness. When Maeve walked down the aisle toward him, his eyes widened and she saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "You're beautiful," he mouthed, and Maeve felt her own tears threaten to spill over. The ceremony was traditional and brief. They exchanged vows, simple promises to love and honor each other, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed Maeve with such tenderness that she heard someone in the congregation sigh. Afterward, there was a celebration at the ranch. Mrs. Crawford and Sally had prepared a feast, and there was music and dancing and more joy than Maeve had experienced in her entire life combined. She danced with Nathan until her feet hurt, and then she danced some more, unwilling to let go of him even for a moment. As the sun was setting, Nathan led Maeve away from the celebration to a small cabin that sat apart from the main house. It had been unused for years, but over the past weeks, Nathan had been working on it in secret with help from the other ranch hands. He had repaired the roof, replaced the windows, built new furniture, and even painted the interior a cheerful yellow that caught the evening light. "It's ours," Nathan said as Maeve stood in the doorway, taking it all in with wonder. "I know it's small, but it's a place of our own. Somewhere we can build our life together." Maeve walked through the cabin, trailing her fingers over the rough-hewn table Nathan had built, the rocking chair positioned by the fireplace, the bedroom with its wide bed covered in a quilt that Mrs. Crawford must have contributed. On the bedside table was a jar filled with wildflowers, and Maeve laughed through her tears. "You really can't help yourself, can you?" she said, turning to Nathan. He grinned and crossed the room to pull her into his arms. "I made a promise," he said. "Wildflowers every morning for as long as you're here to receive them. I intend to keep that promise for the rest of our lives." "I hope that's a very long time," Maeve whispered. "Me too," Nathan replied. And then he was kissing her again, and they were moving toward the bedroom, and Maeve was learning what it meant to be truly loved by someone who cherished her completely. The months that followed were the happiest of Maeve's life. She and Nathan fell into an easy rhythm of domesticity, both working hard but always finding time for each other. True to his word, Nathan brought her wildflowers every single morning, sometimes picked fresh, sometimes gathered the evening before and kept in water overnight. The ritual had become sacred to them, a daily reminder of how they had started and how far they had come. Maeve continued to help Mrs. Crawford in the main house, but now she was paid full wages and treated as an equal rather than a servant. She learned to ride horses, something Nathan insisted on teaching her, and together they would sometimes ride out into the mountains on Sunday afternoons, exploring the wild country and finding new patches of wildflowers that Nathan would inevitably pick to bring home to her. Sally became more than a friend. She became the sister Maeve had never had. They would sit together in the evenings, sewing or mending or simply talking, and Sally would tell stories about her strict Mormon upbringing and how she had escaped to find her own path. In turn, Maeve told Sally about her lonely childhood, about the years of feeling invisible and worthless, and how Nathan had changed everything. "You deserve every bit of happiness," Sally told her one evening as they sat on the porch of Maeve's cabin, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I'm so glad you found each other." As autumn arrived and the aspens in the mountains turned gold, Maeve began to suspect that she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain, until the signs were unmistakable, before she told Nathan. She chose a morning when he brought her asters and goldenrod, flowers that signaled the changing season. "Nathan," she said as he handed her the bouquet, "I have something to tell you." He must have heard something in her voice because his expression became concerned. "What is it?" "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Maeve assured him quickly. "Better than fine, actually. She took a deep breath, suddenly nervous. "I'm going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby." Nathan's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, and then pure, unfiltered joy. "A baby," he repeated, as if he needed to hear it again to believe it. "Maeve, are you sure?" "I'm sure," she said, laughing at his reaction. "Mrs. Crawford helped me confirm it. She's delivered enough babies to know the signs." Nathan let out a whoop of joy and picked Maeve up, spinning her gently before setting her down and looking worried. "Should I not have done that? Is it safe? I don't want to hurt you or the baby." "We're fine," Maeve said, touched by his concern. "Nathan, are you happy?" "Happy," he laughed, and there were tears in his eyes. "Maeve, I'm beyond happy. I don't even have words. A baby. Our baby." He placed his hand carefully on her still, flat stomach. "A son or daughter, a little person who's half you and half me." "Are you hoping for a boy?" Maeve asked. Nathan shook his head. "I don't care one bit. Boy or girl, as long as they're healthy and you're healthy, that's all that matters to me." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for loving me, for marrying me, for giving me this family I never thought I'd have." Maeve held him tight, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady love that had transformed her entire life. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," she said. "You saved me, Nathan. You showed me that I was worth something, that I deserved to be loved. Everything good in my life started the day you gave me those first wildflowers." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. As snow began to fall on the mountains and the valley turned white, Maeve's belly grew round. Mrs. Crawford fussed over her, making sure she ate well and didn't work too hard. Nathan was constantly worried, always checking to make sure she was comfortable, wasn't tired, didn't need anything. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Maeve told him one evening as he insisted on bringing her a footstool for the third time in an hour. "I know," Nathan said, "but humor me. You're carrying the most precious cargo in the world." Even in winter, Nathan managed to bring her flowers every morning. They were dried flowers now, carefully preserved from the summer and fall, or evergreen branches with berries still attached, or the occasional hothouse flower he must have bought in town at considerable expense. The gesture never wavered, never became routine. Each morning, Maeve woke to find Nathan standing beside their bed with some botanical offering. And each morning, she fell in love with him all over again. Christmas came, and Maeve experienced her first real celebration of the holiday. The ranch hands pooled their money to buy a small gift for the baby, a carved wooden rattle that one of them had made. Mrs. Crawford gave Maeve fabric to make baby clothes. Sally spent weeks knitting tiny booties and a blanket. Nathan's gift was a cradle he had built himself, carved from pine with wildflowers etched into the headboard. "So our baby never forgets where they came from," Nathan said, as Maeve ran her fingers over the carved flowers, tears streaming down her face. "So they always know that their parents' love started with wildflowers and morning kindness." The baby was born in early April, as the valley was turning green again, and wildflowers were beginning to bloom in the meadows. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Maeve was afraid, but Mrs. Crawford and Sally were with her the entire time, and Nathan waited anxiously outside, wearing a path in the dirt with his pacing. When the baby finally came, it was a boy, red-faced and squalling and absolutely perfect. Mrs. Crawford cleaned him and wrapped him in the blanket Sally had knitted, then carried him outside to Nathan. "You have a son," she announced, and Nathan's legs nearly gave out from relief and joy. He rushed into the cabin to find Maeve exhausted but smiling, holding their baby against her chest. "He's here," she said softly. "Our son is here." Nathan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. "He's so small," he whispered. "So perfect." "Do you want to hold him?" Maeve asked. Nathan nodded, and Maeve carefully transferred the baby to his arms. Nathan cradled his son with a natural gentleness, and Maeve watched as her strong cowboy husband was reduced to tears by this tiny new life. "What should we name him?" Nathan asked, not taking his eyes off the baby. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Maeve said, "What about Thomas, after your father?" Nathan looked up at her, his eyes shining with emotion. "Thomas," he repeated. "Thomas Cross, I like that. Dad would have liked that." He paused, then added, "Thomas William Cross, William after your favorite flower, Sweet William," Maeve said, surprised. "You told me once that when you were a little girl, before the orphanage, you had a mother who grew Sweet William in a window box, that it was the only flower you remembered from before everything changed." Nathan looked back down at their son. "I thought maybe we could give him that connection to both our pasts." Maeve felt fresh tears well up. She had mentioned that memory only once in passing, months ago. The fact that Nathan had remembered, had treasured that small detail enough to incorporate it into their son's name, made her love him even more. "Thomas William Cross," she said. "It's perfect." The next morning, before dawn as always, Nathan woke and carefully extracted himself from bed so as not to wake Maeve and the baby. He dressed quietly and slipped outside into the cool spring air. The sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, and the meadow near their cabin was filled with wildflowers, primroses and lupine, Indian paintbrush and columbine. Nathan gathered a handful carefully, selecting the prettiest specimens, just as he had done every morning for nearly a year. When he returned to the cabin, Maeve was awake, nursing Thomas in the soft morning light. She looked up when Nathan entered and she smiled at the flowers in his hand. "You didn't have to go out this morning," she said. "You must be exhausted." "I made a promise," Nathan said simply. He put the flowers in water and set them on the table beside the bed where Maeve could see them. Then he sat down beside his wife and son, wrapping his arm around Maeve's shoulders. "Besides, I wanted Thomas to understand from his very first full day in this world that his mother deserves beautiful things, that she should be celebrated and cherished every single day." Maeve leaned against Nathan's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, watching their son nurse contentedly. "I love you," she said. "I don't say it enough, but I love you so much, Nathan Cross." "I love you too," Nathan replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "My Maeve, my wife, mother of my son, you're everything I never knew I needed." They sat there together as the sun rose fully over the mountains. Three people bound together by love and commitment and wildflowers given faithfully every morning. Maeve thought about her life just a year ago, thought about the lonely, hopeless girl who had never received a gift, who had believed she was worthless. That girl seemed like a stranger now, replaced by this woman who was loved and valued and cherished beyond measure. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, then into a bright, energetic boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He learned to walk in the meadows where his father picked wildflowers, learned to ride sitting in front of Nathan on his horse, learned kindness from watching how his parents treated each other and everyone around them. When Thomas was 3 years old, Maeve became pregnant again. This time she was less nervous, more confident in her body's ability to carry and deliver a child. Nathan was just as attentive as he had been the first time, maybe more so, and he continued his morning ritual of bringing wildflowers even on the coldest winter days. Their second child was a daughter, born in September as the leaves were turning and the air was crisp with the promise of autumn. They named her Rose Margaret Cross, Rose for the wild roses Nathan had brought Maeve so many times, and Margaret after Mrs. Crawford, who had become like a mother to Maeve. Mrs. Crawford herself was getting older now, slowing down though she refused to fully retire. She spent more time with the children than in the kitchen, and Maeve had largely taken over the cooking for the ranch with Sally's help. Sally herself was being courted by one of the ranch hands, a steady young man named James who treated her with the same respect Nathan showed Maeve. "Looks like we're both getting our happy endings," Sally said one afternoon as she and Maeve watched their children play in the yard. Thomas was teaching Rose how to pick wildflowers, mimicking his father's careful technique. "Who would have thought?" Maeve replied. 2 years ago we were just girls trying to survive. Now look at us. Now we're women with families and homes and people who love us," Sally said. She glanced at Maeve. "Do you ever think about Mrs. Kimball?" Maeve considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "I wonder if she's still running that boarding house, still treating people the way she treated me. Mostly I feel sorry for her." She must be so miserable inside to be that cruel to someone who was just trying their best. You're more forgiving than I would be, Sally said. I'm just grateful, Maeve replied. If she hadn't fired me, I might never have come to the ranch. I might never have had this life. She watched Nathan emerge from the barn and start walking toward where the children played, his face lighting up when he saw them. Sometimes I think everything had to happen exactly the way it did to lead me here. That evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Nathan and Maeve sat together on the porch of their cabin, watching the stars emerge. It was something they did often, these quiet moments of companionship that required no words. I was thinking, Nathan said eventually. We've been saving money for a while now. What would you think about buying our own place? Not right away, but in the next year or two. A small ranch of our own where we could raise horses, maybe some cattle. Maeve turned to look at him, surprised. Leave the double bar. Not far, Nathan assured her. There's land for sale just north of here,